Director, Real-Time Cloud at Refinitiv, an LSEG business. Ben Stevens, Global Head of Product Management at Instinet, and Arthur Rank, Global Director, Capital Market Solutions at Colt Capital Markets. I'll be asking them all to introduce themselves shortly, but let me just share some information with you to make the most of today's webinar. To the right of the video, you'll see a box for questions and polls. We'll be running 3 live audience polls today during the webinar, so please vote and help us gauge industry opinion. I'll let you know when a poll question is coming up. Also, if you'd like to ask the experts your questions, we'll take those questions as we go along. So if you'd like to send in any questions, please do that often and frequently, and we'll answer as many as we can during the webinar. Okay, enough of me and over to our speakers. Saurabh, please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your interest here in Cloud and Colo.
Sure. So I'm Saurabh Srivastava, and I lead the options market making software team at Chicago Trading Company. So as you can imagine, we trade options, and we do have a lot of vested interest in reducing our technology costs, and that's why we do express interest in cloud computing and, of course, proximity colocation technology. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Richard.
Hi, Richard Jones from Refinitiv. I've been with the company a long time, done a variety of jobs, but ultimately always in sort of enterprise technology, and specifically now obviously in cloud. And really my role is helping customers migrate our products and our services and solutions to their cloud-based environment. And obviously preceding that, we were involved in a similar kind of journey with colocation and proximity hosting. So the two are coming together, and that's kind of my role.
Thank you. Ben.
Hi, so Ben Stevens. I run product management at Instinet, so that's part of the Numeric group. We deal with everything from GUIs all the way through to front and back office trading systems, and then run our own colocation network. We've been moving a lot of our data jobs and processes to the cloud over the last few years, so very happy to share our experiences.
Thank you. And Arthur.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So Arthur Rank, I manage the global capital market solution sales team at Colt. So my team's responsible for selling anything to do with electronic trading infrastructure to the capital markets community globally. That goes from anything within a managed colo or proximity facility, including hardware management, real-time raw or normalized market data, our global financial extranet, PrismNet, which underpins our connectivity network, and anything to do with low latency connectivity and execution services.
Excellent. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's get started with an audience poll. The question this time, what progress has your organization made on adding cloud to your co-location or proximity hosting strategy? So while you answer that question, let me come to Richard to talk about the state of play on using cloud as part of a co-location or proximity hosting strategy. Richard.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a great kind of lead in to kind of the event, and ultimately I think I've got to take it from the context of being a vendor, obviously, and our strategy is clearly customer driven. So we kind of take our decisions based on their input, but ultimately I kind of see cloud within the colo and within proximity as an evolution, not a revolution, because the customer's journeys are taking them to cloud, but it's a natural extension of the journeys they probably started by actually going into colocation and third-party data centers, having moved away from their traditional own data centers, i.e. in their offices. I think we've seen over the years that communities and trading hubs have been created in essentially industry-leading third-party data centers. We can cite them, the Equinexes of the world, the kind of Lumens of previously Savis and CenturyLink, and obviously Interaction now Digital Realty. They've been formed, they've been set up, and what we're seeing is that the source of liquidity was possibly the attraction for those locations. They were built by sort of industry leading technologists, but those locations, notwithstanding sort of the high spec of those facilities, provided connectivity, provided choice through major telcos like obviously Colt. And when we kind of profile our install base, our customer base, there's no surprises that there's a common kind of address base, and they are those locations. And the next question that's coming is, can you provide us help with assistance in getting your services into cloud? And ultimately, you know, the decision for the cloud or the CSPs is, we want to be part of the financial services community. So what have they done? They've provided their on-ramps in those locations, you know, anyway. So it becomes kind of a very kind of joined up story of, you know, us as a vendor, customers there already, but equally the connectivity being in place. And it's providing our customers the chance to use our content, our data, within the cloud's kind of I suppose tooling is probably the best way of describing it, because clearly the CSPs are offering so much more than ever before, and in a commercial model that's very, very attractive. So, you know, I see it gaining momentum. I think the work that I've kind of done with customers, it's been sort of over the last 2-3 years, it's been sort of maybe taking one application or a couple of applications, but now we're looking at wholesale migrations into cloud. And those locations, as I said, you know, the reality is they're in those key proximity hosting and colocation locations, because they've moved there over the last 10-12 years because of the hunt for liquidity.
Okay, Arthur, what do you see out there in terms of how people are playing this one out?
Yeah, for us, it's a mixed situation, depending on kind of the market participants. You know, we have contact with everyone from the exchange to HFTs, quant funds, prime brokers, ISVs, technology providers, market data providers. So different players in the market at different places today. So I thought it'd probably be easy just to look at, you know, 4 key players who are particularly prevalent in the kind of colo proximity environment space. So from the HFTs, quant funds, algo trading firms, we've seen very little adoption to date, particularly around their front end trading. You know, latency is key. They want the management of those environments under their control, you know, to have their exact specs of servers and to have complete control over that. So not really any movement at the moment from the HFTs. If we look at kind of investment banks, prime brokerage firms, there's a greater adoption, but they tend to be using cloud and more of a hybrid environment, and be looking at moving middle and back office functions into the cloud, and still having their front office execution brokerage services sitting in dedicated environments and still having control of that. But they're also tending to look at shifting more workload as well for test and development environments into the clouds today. So it's a bit of a hybrid model for those. For independent software vendors, for example, in the market, who have those software as a service models in dedicated environments in colos and proximities. I think cloud, what we're seeing for them, is the ultimate goal, some further down the line. So really, it's for those guys, it's moving those workloads from those dedicated environments into cloud-based environments to give them more flexibility, to perhaps allow them to access remote markets more easily moving forward in a more cost-effective way. The question I've got there, and the question we have when I in my interactions with those firms, is actually what's the appetite from the end customers to move from a dedicated to a cloud environment. So I think they still have that to overcome. And then just the last one I wanted to touch on was the kind of challenger ISVs and Fintechs, where it's a huge amount of adoption. You know, a lot of these providers and service providers, they're environments are built in the cloud, both their dev, their test, and their production environment. So that's very much within their DNA. But a lot of that tends to be in less latency sensitive trading environments, particularly around, you know, fixed income, for example, less so much on the execution side on exchange.
Okay, thank you. So a big mix seen by both of you there. Let's see the poll results, if we may. And Richard, would you like to comment on that? Is that the sort of picture you might be seeing?
Oh, very much so, yeah. I'm just looking at I would say some progress. Like I said, probably is a case of not a wholesale shift, but maybe they're taking 1 or 2 applications, they're doing their testing, they're doing part of their kind of move. But we are seeing kind of conversations start around sort of planning a wholesale shift of certain parts of our technology. So yeah, I think it's very representative.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you for voting, everybody. And let me bring in Ben. Ben, please tell us why trading organizations are taking this approach to sort of hybrid infrastructure and its potential benefits.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I have to agree with Arthur on his sort of summary of the sort of participants. And if we take our sort of situation as an example, we've we connected it to the cloud from the main financial data centers, mostly because that was where you could run a high capacity cross connect. It was available in a meet me room to be able to go from from our Colo setup, as it turned out, directly into someone like AWS or Google. Now, that's cheaper than buying leased lines, especially when you're talking, very high capacity leased lines. And all of our existing connectivity into Colo, would all be 10 gigabit or higher. So that was the sort of first simple option, is that it was easier just to connect and run a cross connect like we would anywhere else. I think then the question is, well, what do you want to actually process in the cloud, and why are you doing it? And for us, the main benefit of cloud is really the flexibility. It's the obvious things. It's the flexibility of the amount of compute and storage that we can take on demand. Now, don't get me wrong, we have base loads that we want to run, but when you're running trading operations that say run for 8 hours a day, then it can be very useful to be able to increase and decrease the amount of compute that you need. And then if you think about sort of our trading operations day to day, we have quite substantial database requiremts, and those database requirements are there for reporting, and particularly things like consolidated audit trail in the US. It generates quite large amounts of sort of reporting requirements and storage requirements. Why store that on-prem when we want to be able to sort of go back and analyze it at a later date? We're better off storing that potentially on cloud native solutions. So, if we're thinking about offloading those types of jobs, then maybe there are other jobs that you can offload, and then that brings you into the sort of back testing environment, and then potentially running sort of things like real-time analytics alongside your co-location environment. So, I don't think we would suggest that you can run a latency sensitive application sitting in the cloud, but at the same time, if you are connected to the cloud with a high bandwidth connection, then you can use and leverage the amount of compute that's on offer, the types of services that are on offer there, that really aren't that easy or would cost a fortune to run on-prem. So that's where the hybrid piece comes in. Let's use the flexibility that a cloud provider gives us to do the data jobs and the data crunching that would cost us a fortune to run in our own dedicated environment. And of course we can trial things very easily, which you can't do on-prem. We all know by now that the order time for a server is sort of 6 months or more. We can spin up a server in 6 minutes or less. When we're talking about doing it on most of the cloud providers. So that flexibility, I think, is well, it's quite phenomenal. Really, it's quite a phenomenal change in the way we will operate.
Okay, lovely. Sorry, what would you say, and what would you add here in terms of sort of why hybrid and what you can get out of it?
So I echo everything that Ben said, that of course the biggest advantage is flexibility and time to market. The fact that you can quickly spin up a server and then scale it up or scale it down, depending upon your fluctuating business needs. I think that's very important. That's very, yes, number one. Of course, the technology cost reduction benefits to using shared resources. Absolutely, that's also very paramount. The other thing is, of course, like Ben touched upon, like the ability to use cloud-based tools for data analytics. Again, why would we do it on-prem when we can do that much more easily on cloud? The amount of throughput it offers, the amount of computing resources that it offers, it's amazing. So it's a no-brainer for us. Another advantage I'd like to add on to it, to what Ben said, was is that there are also some regulatory and compliance considerations, especially for a financial firm, that many of the cloud vendors have already solved or taken care for you. So that's pretty important. That's kind of nice to have as a financial firm, that when you know that, hey, your cloud vendor, they have solved these problems for you. So then you don't have to worry about these regulatory aspects or these compliance needs that FINRA or others, they want from you. So that's another thing I'd like to add.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. And plenty of benefit there to think about and discuss as we go forward. And let me come back to you, if I may, Arthur. And how can a business use case be made for cloud in a colo or proximity hosting strategy? And how can management buy-in and required resources be secured? You've got your mute on. Thanks.
Error there. Should know after 2 years. Yeah, so it really comes back to the points that that kind of Ben and Saurabh made. The flexibility and scalability that it offers really drive those business cases on behalf of customers. I think there is a cost to that by doing it, but what we're seeing, but that's offset now by the supply chain lead times and delays we're seeing as well. So that additional cost for scalable and flexible and high return business is almost negligible these days. I think there's probably still we're seeing some internal challenges within firms to overcome with these. Who has ownership of of that environment, the willingness to outsource in some cases we've seen from some customers, and which elements and components of those environments are firms happy to outsource as a first step. I mean, I remember being at an A-Team event 7 or 8 years ago when we were talking. There was a session on cloud, and the universal opinion in the room was, we were 15 years away from any cloud adoption in capital markets because, you can't put your crown jewels in in that environment. It's got to be kept on-prem and within your environment. So that's obviously very much a change and evolved situation. And I think the other case people are looking at is being able to spin up virtual environments in other markets that are maybe harder to access, where they don't have a local presence to be able to test new markets. But then we've got to come back to the regulatory questions as well that Sarah raised. Have you got the ability? Ease of access and speed of access to markets is great, but have you got everything in place from a regulatory perspective to do that? So that's still something to overcome.
Okay, thank you. I suspect I remember that event, and gosh, fast forward, here we are. Yeah. And over to you, Richard, to talk a little bit about the business case for cloud in a colo or proximity hosting environment.
Yeah, I kind of cement all the thoughts that the guys have kind of already. I kind of see it as an extension of perhaps some of the points I made earlier, but from the context of a vendor, we're obviously being asked to bring in huge kind of data sets into those environments because the customers there already, but if there's someone's thinking about going into a colo now, I mean, the business case is there. No one is going to be building their own data centers anymore. The industry leaders are firmly established. The economics are kind of known. I don't think anyone's going to be building their own. We'll leave it to the existing providers of that technology, and obviously the CSPs are doing it themselves and providing on-ramps from our colos. So I kind of think it's a situation where the community is there already and will continue to be kind of built out, but the economics of those environments stand up for any new participant or existing participants because no one's going to move away from them. I think the point I'm making about sort of huge quantities of data being asked by us to bring into those facilities is obvious because of what the guys have already said about sort of some of those workloads require the data sets that we carry. But also the tooling and the capacity and the computing power and storage that the CSPs offer. So the whole thing's coming together.
Okay. And on that, Richard, what about, I mean, obviously, in terms of people resources, you need expertise, not necessarily, large volumes of people. Is the expertise out there in the market?
I think we as a company made a decision on certain CSPs early on, and I think it's now the case that clearly where we sit, we have the skills internally, but we were able to go to the market because there is abundance in certain CSPs. But if I look at APAC and look at Asia and look at Ali and things like that, less so. I think we've had concerns as a company certainly for the resourcing for providing our equipment and our tooling into that environment. So yeah, there are challenges, but I think for the ones that we use, certainly in kind of Europe and America, I think the resources are there and the market's there for us to attract as well if we need more.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And coming back to you, Sarah, tell us a little bit about the optimal mix of cloud and colo or proximity hosting for the trading workload.
So this is a tough question to answer as this will be different from every firm. So overall, you'll have to ask, like, what's the cost benefit to you when you rent the physical space for your technology assets versus when you rent the technology assets themselves? So that's one thing. Then what resources, both human capital and financial capital, do you have to build out and manage this transition? That's another thing. And finally, like, how do your costs or benefits or complexity, how does it increase as you scale up? So like looking out, will they still look reasonable to you a year or two from now, or would they be very different, or they would not be easy to manage? So would they change significantly? So those are some questions you'll have to ask yourself and then arrive at the perfect mix of hybrid or cloud versus a dedicated colo setup.
Okay, thanks. Ben, what would you say there in terms of like finding some kind of optimal mix as a, sorry, was it for an ever-changing optimal mix?
Well, I think that one of the great things about the cloud is you don't have to define how much of it you want to use. As long as you're connected to it, then, you know, as we've pointed out before, it can go up and down. So I think you want to sort of turn it around and say, well, where do I need to be located next to a trading system? And, you know, if there's an economic benefit that outweighs the extraordinary cost sometimes of being co-located somewhere, then you know, you should take that up. And, you know, for every trading strategy or for every business model, you know, sort of says that will be different. You know, it's a different price point if you're doing arbitrage to market making, to options market making, to brokerage. It really depends. One of the things I think we find though is that, you know, the real question is more, how many locations do you want to be in? Right? How many asset classes are you in? And you know, could you get away with just trading, let's say, in the 3 core data centers? Let's call them the sort of FX data centers of TY3, LD4, and NY4. You know, if you're going to set anything up globally, you will be in those 3 data centers first. But after that, you know, there are many more that you might want to set yourself up in. And then your next question is, well, what does it cost me to move data around between those data centers? Do I need my own network, or, you know, can I pull everything back perhaps to a cloud brain to make, you know, make decisions there? Now that'll all come down to the type of strategy you run. You know, clearly, if you're running an arbitrage strategy, you're not going to be pulling data back up into the cloud. On the other hand, if you're running, I don't know, a crypto strategy, then you might be very comfortable running most of it back up into the cloud, because the arbitrages, you know, exist probably between the 3 data centers I mentioned, and you may only need connectivity there. So I think I would restate it as, you know, what's the optimal setup? Well, it's probably as much flexibility as you can grant yourself, allowing you to trial certain colo data centers, perhaps via some sort of proximity cloud location. That's fantastic. You know, if you can put compute down in South Africa or in Australia or in Indonesia, or, you know, or in Brazil, for example, and that's the first time you're sort of trying that market, and you don't need to put servers on the ground, and you can try it, make things work, then, you know, the cloud grants you that, and that's quite outstanding. But at the end of the day, you know, if you need to process data with something like an FPGA or hardware, then you're going to have to do that in Colo, and there's no real choice about that. But I would think a lot of the other jobs you can offload to somewhere more flexible, and therefore probably cheaper when we think total cost of ownership.
Okay, thank you. So quite a lot of elements of the equation there. And Richard, along the same lines, how can multi-cloud implementations be made, and to what advantage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think kind of there's been a movement, an evolution towards sort of a multi-cloud setup. I mean, there's a business that started that journey a number of years ago. We kind of probably took the approach that many did, which was you pick one based on, you know, many different reasons. Perhaps it's cost, perhaps it's location, availability of people and resources that we touched on previously, perhaps the tools kind of offered, or the internal skills and knowledge that we had at the time. But we always had to have it as a caveat that we wanted to be able to deliver, you know, our products and services from one CSP, but to many, we had to kind of remain kind of cloud neutral. And I think probably at that stage, you know, companies were probably going through that, you know, private versus public conversation. There was probably a lack of industry kind of best practices. You know, you think 3, 4, 5 years ago, the world's moved on now for obvious reasons. So I think probably people did take that kind of initial start of, you know, dipping your toe in and taking, you know, one CSP. I think there were obviously concerns, we touched upon it before, about privacy, security. You know, that certainly was the case. But ultimately, you know, the CSPs like AWS have worked hard to cover off all those questions. So you then kind of look at the way possibly some of the businesses that we were interacting were set up, and, you know, the buying patterns or procedures were probably slightly changing now, and invariably kind of tech and business had different requirements. but the technologies now are on the front desk. They can make the decisions. They are owning their own sort of P&L. So ultimately what happens is your different desks within different institutions were probably taking, or within the same institutions, I'll say, we're probably taking different choices. And what you then end up with is probably a hybrid of multi-cloud anyway, because they've chosen to go one place because the tooling there's better for their requirement. So I think as long as there's no kind of sort of frequent migrations of kind of workloads across because of the obvious cost of moving data in and out of cloud, I think you're in that situation now that multi-cloud is becoming the norm. I think it also covers off some of the questions around sort of contingency, BCP, your regulation, although they play a part in the decision-making process now as well. But I think it's been an evolution as we've all kind of continue to go down this journey to cloud. But multi-cloud is becoming certainly the normal, and we've got to be prepared for it.
Thank you. Arthur, what do you see there in terms of multi-cloud environments in Colo and proximity?
Yeah, well, I think it's an inevitability. As Richard said, it's been an evolution from single to multi, but it's driven by so many different factors. You've got, if you look at just in terms of what the exchanges are doing themselves, we know that they make significant revenues from dedicated Colo exchange environments for certain markets. I think there's an interest there in protecting that revenue stream for those exchanges. But you've seen big announcements in the last 12 months from some of the world's largest exchanges. You got the CME Google announcement, NASDAQ AWS, Cebo offering certain data sets in AWS. So I think from the exchanges and content side, they're almost hitching their wagons to a horse. But how far that's going to go is still to be determined, because I think there's still a huge amount of road still to play in terms of those dedicated Colo environments and what you can offer out of each. But if you just take that as an example, if someone wants to trade NASDAQ and CME, and they've got a single cloud strategy, they're still going to need to connect to another cloud provider to connect to another exchange, further down the road. So it's still a massively evolving process. For individual firms, what cloud providers and for what processes is each provider best suited from a tooling perspective, as Richard said, to meet their individual requirements. So from kind of a connectivity perspective, from the way Colt and our peers serve the market, flexible and scalable connectivity for any firms involved in electronic trading or market data distribution is key. How quickly can you access and move critical data between those environments quickly and scalably, but also cost effectively, is what has to be answered there in the longer term.
Okay, so way to run on this one until people have got exactly what they're hoping for, perhaps. Yeah, okay, that's great. Let's take a pause for another audience poll. The question this time: what are the practical challenges of implementing cloud in a Colo or proximity setting at your organization? So while you answer this question, you can tick as many boxes as you feel are appropriate. Let me come back to Arthur to talk about the practical challenges of implementing and managing cloud in a Colo or proximity setting. We've touched on a few of these, but can you round it all up for us?
Yeah, so the biggest hurdle that we see is the technical challenges, particularly for real-time trading. If we look at this, because why is anyone within an exchange Colo, why are they paying those premium rates? It's for real-time execution. So the biggest technical hurdle I think everyone has to overcome is the hurdle of consuming and then redistributing multicast market data into the cloud. We connect to multiple market participants, who serve a number of functions across the ecosystem today, from exchanges into those cloud environments. But that's only for unicast data, so it's more used for drop copy services, trade confirmations, etc., rather than the real time side of things. So getting over that hurdle brings us closer to lower or higher latency tolerant firms being able to execute from within those environments, and also then being able to virtualize any monitoring capabilities and monitor the quality of that data to ensure that what they're seeing is accurate and they're trading on accurate and real prices. So that's the biggest technical hurdle at the moment. I think we've got to overcome from an execution perspective.
Okay, Saurabh, what would you say there in terms of the challenges here?
So in addition to what Arthur just mentioned about technical challenges, so like there's this cost of lifting and shifting the software stack to the cloud. So today you've made significant investment in hardware, and of course, not just financial capital, but also human capital to basically build out an infrastructure that works well for you. So you have your servers and networking equipment, your software that interacts or integrates and works well with each other. So now dismantling all of this and moving just the software stack to cloud is disruptive, and making it all work seamlessly, it requires effort. So there is definitely a big technology challenge there. Additionally, many trading firms, especially the HFT ones, they use specialized hardware or some kind of proprietary hardware, which may or may not be available on the cloud. So that's one thing. And even if you were to bring your own hardware, how will that integrate and work well with a cloud vendor? So that's a question. And finally, if you are on the cloud and sharing all your resources like everyone else is, then what's your differentiating factor? What's your edge? So those are some questions that a trading or HFT firm would need to answer.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. And if we may, can we see the poll results, please? Okay, Arthur, would you like to comment on that? That's not what I'd expected.
That's interesting, actually. I think that's you're moving in on a technical journey, and I think that from sitting as a vendor, that's a really key consideration. Who you partner with on this journey, whether it's from a cloud provider perspective, a technology, a connectivity provider is key. You've got to have that shared kind of future vision and understand that you're on the same path together. And Saurabh said, the legacy services that the likes of the HFTs have, proprietary hardware, proprietary configurations, replicating that in the cloud. Again, it's going to be a headache for anyone who's operating in that way today. And,
okay.
And the latency challenge of getting into the cloud, obviously, you're in Colo for a latency advantage. It's the primary reason for being within those environments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for voting. That's an interesting result. Thanks, Arthur. All right, coming back to you, Saurabh, we talked about some of these challenges and the technologies and tools and so on. What can be done to resolve some of these problems, and other particular technologies that sort of come into play here?
So I think the number one is you need to have a clear understanding of what you want to get out of this transition, and then choose your vendor wisely. I think that's also pointed to you, is also mentioned by the poll result. Then, of course, you work with the vendor to understand how they can help you make this transition. For example, the example that I gave about proprietary hardware, specialized hardware, how will we make that transition in the cloud space? So that'll be one challenge that will need to be solved. And finally, I think you also need to invest in building the human capital that's required to help you make this transition. So you need to find the right set of people who know the cloud and who definitely know low latency HFT infrastructure too. So they need to have both the skill sets to help you migrate to the cloud as seamlessly as possible.
Okay, fine. Arthur, what would you add here in terms of resolving some of the challenges that we've talked about?
Yeah, so look, I mean, the correct technology partner or partners is critical here, as the audience have confirmed. On the market data side of things, we've actually been, as Colt, been working, and I'm sure this is happening across the markets, working on proof of concepts with the likes of AWS and Azure in terms of solving that multicast data into the cloud. So we've come up with some positive results. We've also the question of how you can have the data, the quality of the quality assurance around that data is critical there. So we're in the process of virtualizing what we call our MMS monitoring service, which monitors the quality of the real-time market data feeds to be able to monitor at egress and ingress within those environments, so we can really look at packet loss, latencies from end to end, from our POPs into the virtual POPs within those cloud environments, to assure our customers that once they move forward with us, that the data quality is of the standard they require either in a cloud or a dedicated environment. So, having those questions is critical.
Okay, thank you both. And let's take a little break. We have some audience questions, so let's take a block of those on now, if we may. Ben, can I ask the first one to you? It's something you touched on, and it says, we would like to build a hybrid architecture. Where is a good place to start?
Where's a good location to start? I hope that would
well,
would
perhaps
aim at.
that,
or maybe
perhaps
it's what
services
services.
What you're going to be doing.
I think there's a couple of things there, and I think one of your sort of later questions that we prepared for would be sort of what people advice would you give people. So, look, I think when you're starting in a location, you can't really go far wrong with one of the very well established financial data centers because of the interconnectivity of all of the vendors that are there. There's pretty much every vendor you could ever wish to connect to, whether it's a fixed connectivity vendor or a leased line vendor, or it's a dark fiber provider, or it's a cloud vendor. So, if you pick one of the sort of key data centers on each of the continents, then you're not going to go far wrong from a geographical point in which to start. And then I guess that the next bit is, well, how do you want to move data between your sort of colo environment and the cloud? And I think the thing I'd say there is, to Arthur's point, and I don't know if she's really been that explicit about it, it is now possible to source market data directly in the cloud. And we've done the work to be able to source, from one of our vendors, all of the market data we could ever want in the world in the cloud. So, if you don't need to move it, don't move it, right? If you need to process it locally, from a latency point of view, consider doing that. I think it gets very difficult to move ultra low latency, high quality market data, effectively packet capture it, and then split it up into a series of unicast streams and push it perhaps over something like a Kafka bus into the cloud. That's doable, but that's a serious enterprise infrastructure. So, if you're getting started, I wouldn't necessarily advise trying to build those sorts of things. I'd think about, what information have I got that no one else has got that sits in Colo, and that's probably your trading data and your own latency data. And what data can I get that I need to mix that with to get some sort of useful insight? And that's probably market data and static data from a vendor. And what we're finding is that a lot of the data you could want that's I don't want to use the word commoditized, but let's say is available from quite a large variety of sources, is now available in multiple locations on the cloud. And that can make your ability to produce a meaningful trading infrastructure or trading system much easier and much quicker, especially if you're starting from scratch. If we look at one of the things that we've done, or we're about to do, we're a vendor, a GUI vendor. We have our own execution management platform. And one of the things we'd love to be able to do is now make that a server-side or service platform instead of more of a web-delivered platform than a desktop-delivered platform. Now, to do that, you need to get your market data onto the server side. And if you wanted to deliver that from the cloud, which is probably the best place to deliver it from a security and scalability point of view, well, then you're going to need your market data there. And vendors have now been solving that problem for us without us having to take our own market data and move it onto the cloud. So there's a lot now that you can get done that you probably I never imagined we'd be able to do this quickly.
Okay, that's great. Arthur, I think you mentioned the exchanges and where some of that data is going. So I have a question here, which we may have an answer to. Let me put it to you. It says, colocation is all about speed and low latency trading, not necessary cost of infrastructure within limits. Is it possible to build your cloud presence in the same GCP AWS data center where exchanges are moving their matching engines to?
Yeah, and this varies exchange by exchange, really. And as I said previously, there is a premium on being in you have certain exchanges, Deutsche Börse being a good example, SIBO being another, where they're in liquidity data centers such as LD4 and FR2. But there are still a large number of the world's premium exchanges which sit within their own co-location environments. And how readily or quickly will they be willing to move that resource, that kind of that real nugget within their kind of jewelry box out of those environments? So I think we've still got a long way to go there, and making data available in the cloud and having that at the lowest latency source across connect in a dedicated exchanges data center. I think we're still a way off of that. Redistribution of data into the cloud is one thing, but actually replicating that in the lowest latency fashion within a dedicated exchange co-location is something quite different as things stand today.
Okay, thank you. And a latency question for you as well, Richard. It says, could a cloud solution for co-location hosting guarantee low latency for brokers or clients, perhaps an SLA of 1 microsecond, millisecond, not sure.
So I think, can you just repeat the question? Because I've got a couple of points I'll try to want to make there.
Of course. Could a cloud solution for co-location hosting guarantee low latency latency and clients?
I don't think you're ever going to be able to kind of guarantee it. That's the point with when you look at the way kind of on ramps and out ramps to cloud work. There's a reason, as the guys have been saying over the last 10 years, that the community have invested heavily in connectivity themselves because they want guarantees. They want a certain predictable kind of latency to come out. I think when you talk of cloud, I think at the moment that's not really offered. I mean, we time and time again get asked the same question as a vendor, and as much as we provide an end-to-end solution, we're still in the hands of some telcos which we don't have complete control of. So I think unless you can take that piece and own it, I think you're never going to possibly be able to kind of reach that kind of nirvana through kind of cloud connectivity, because it's that question of deterministic, and I don't think you're ever going to get those answers to build into an SLA.
Okay, that's great. And sorry, one for you. You mentioned regulation. What are the regulatory issues here, and how can they be resolved? As somebody mentioned earlier, some of it can be handed off to the vendor, but at the end of the day, it's your problem.
Sure. So of course, you have those standard business continuity plan, those kind of compliance requirements, which typically the cloud providers can help you achieve. Then there are some FINRA regulatory and compliance requirements too, which a lot of vendors have addressed. So like standard ones are the market access ones. So those are the ones that just makes the life of a financial firm much easier when they know that the vendor that they're tying up with, the vendor has already solved and addressed those market access regulatory compliance requirements.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And this one, I come back to you if I may, Richard. It's a very general question. It says, if we look at the financial markets, how is the move towards cloud of big companies, and are they the movers to cloud, or do we see it more as a move from the smaller financial institutions, which sometimes are seen as more agile and faster to move?
That's a really, really good question. I think for me personally, I've seen a mixture of both. I think the conversations with the larger customers are certainly happening. Certainly when we kind of look at our kind of historical stack that's been deployed on-prem or within a colo for certain reasons, there is an appetite from those same institutions to now move that for cost reasons into cloud. So we see that, and that's certainly perhaps a case study that I probably could highlight. But then equally, we're obviously aware that there are many customers out there that are new to us, that are spinning up, that want our content and are asking for it to be delivered into a cloud environment. Now, there's subtle differences in the solutions that we're providing, with the sort of a flexibility of a smaller real-time fee. Perhaps it's a conflated fee with kind of less latency dependent, less kind of updates per second potentially needed, but certainly obviously with all trades and trade safe. But we have got a growing franchise of customers that are taking what is known as essentially real-time optimized in cloud, and that's been a success for us as a company over the last 18 or so months. So it's a mixture, certainly.
Okay, so it's not the largest do best, the smallest have to follow behind in this instance.
No, I don't think so. I think the largest are kind of getting there for different reasons, cost being the primary driver, but then the new participants that are starting up are looking for that kind of, they don't come with a kind of the legacy technology debt. They kind of basically want to just go straight into cloud.
Okay, fine. And one last one for you, Ben. It may not be an easy one to respond to. I don't know. Let's try it. It says, do you consider vendor lock-in when deploying to a cloud provider and using ready-made solutions? I'm not sure if you do use ready-made solutions, but does cloud come, in general terms, does it come with vendor lock-in as so many things in the past did?
I think the short answer is yes, and the long answer is no. So how can I square that? If you use the cloud provider's native solution, then clearly at some level there is an amount of lock-in. And the way around that is you can use generic solutions that are often able to be run on multiple cloud providers. The real question you've actually got to answer for yourself is, do you want to go to the expense and the hassle of running a multi-cloud environment with multiple cloud vendors and making sure all of your applications are interoperable, or a number of them are interoperable? Or do you want to go down the route of saying, if we're worried about BCP, business continuity, are we worried about the likes of an Amazon or a Google or a Microsoft, or are we more worried about the zone in which we're operating? So, if you think it's a financial consideration, then you're going to have to go down a multi-cloud environment and make things interoperable. If you're worried about business continuity, then it's business continuity for that application, which in general across at least those three can be solved by running your application across multiple zones. So then your question is, well, how do you want to avoid sort of vendor lock? Well, at that point, it's which applications you deploy to which cloud vendors, and what's the cost benefit of making sure that the application that you build is portable immediately or relatively easily portable in the event that you decided to run it on another cloud provider. So there's no short answer to that. You can get yourself very much locked into an ecosystem if you want to, but at the same time, I'm assured by my colleagues that it's not the end of the world to unpick. Although when we talk about it in 10 years' time, it might be a completely different matter.
Okay, thank you to our audience for your questions, very insightful, and thank you to our speakers for their tremendous answers. So let's move on with my questions now, and bringing you back in, Richard. Can you describe some of your work with customers in existing proximity locations and what they really need from a vendor to make things work well in the cloud?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think what's been interesting in sort of the conversations we as a team have been having is whilst we kind of, and I talked about in the previous kind of answers to one of the questions around sort of the need for delivering sort of an optimized feed into cloud, which is available, and we've been servicing customers for a couple of years now. What we're increasingly seeing was actually the need to bring in a full tick feed into CSPs, and specifically the customers that are asking for that are actually in the colo and the proximity location. So for us, with all the challenges around latency that we've been talking about, to have that as a requirement, as a need coming in, was initially kind of quite surprising. However, I think it probably extends beyond that, in that they're probably not using the content, for that sort of front office, but they want to store it. They kind of want to use it. They want to kind of test some theories with the tooling that the CSPs provide. So we do see that want to store the content themselves still for their own kind of secret source, but equally alongside that, we've offered for a couple of years now our historical archive of tick history within one specific CSP. It was sourced in and stored in AWS, but we've moved it into GCP because of the tooling that GCP offered. So ultimately that has been a journey that we've been going on. But equally, the other point I made earlier on is around sort of the infrastructure that we've had on-prem that deployed what was known as historically RMDS or TREP, or now it's known as a real-time distribution system. Customers are wanting to move that and take that into a cloud. And again, those customers, part of that estate would have been in the colo or in a proximity, more likely in a proximity location. So that's the kind of work, they're the kind of use cases that we're going through. So kind of a migration of the estate. It's not without kind of challenges and hurdles to overcome. I think we've touched upon it, on this webinar. I mean, customers are wanting clearly from us a continued end-to-end service and end-to-end experience. And when you hand off into a proximity or a colo, we've got meet me rooms, we've got cross connects, we've got telcos, we've got the on ramps into CSPs, and that's where the kind of issues from a service point of view, who takes responsibility for what, has been something that we've needed to overcome, because it's right that the customer wants kind of an end-to-end SLA and an end-to-end experience. So that's when people like Colt and Arthur's world and us sort of sit down and we work out whether or not we can utilize the existing relationships, the existing kind of infrastructure, to ensure that we can provide that end-to-end connectivity all the way through to the CSP. And very much that's the focus of our work over the next year, to make sure that those kind of that can be achieved.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And I think we have just about time for a final audience poll. The question: what extent of business and operational benefits has your organization gained, or would it expect to gain from adding cloud to your colo or proximity strategy? So while you answer that one, and again, you can tick as many of the boxes as are appropriate, let me come to Ben to talk about the operational business benefits here. What do you see?
Well, I think Richard really summarised it. It's now the fact that I think just from more from a business point of view, well, we can acquire services that we don't have to build ourselves. So a couple of examples. One, as Richard said, we sit in that camp of being in colo in I don't know, it's 15 plus locations. Yet we will look to potentially take market data from one of the vendors or several vendors into the cloud, because it solves it for us. We don't then have to do it ourselves. And the fact that Richard's firm and others have done that heavy lifting and made it secure and made it stable and done the data cleansing, means that we can buy that as a service. Whereas historically we would have had to go through the brain ache and all the maintenance of solving that for ourselves, or even taking Richard's data and moving it to the cloud ourselves. So not having to do it, is one of those operational benefits. Another, which was quite a surprise, was we were connecting to one of the regulators, and they needed to provide us. We need to provide each other with some files. Now, the historical way of doing that would have been to buy a leased line between ourselves and the regulator. I think the lead time for that was something like 6 weeks to 3 months. But they offered a cloud interconnect, and we were up and running in 3 days. You've got to see it to believe it. Once you're there and you have operational processes that are working, with a cloud provider, then the network effects are quite phenomenal. So I would encourage anyone to get a presence and try and figure out what you can do with that presence, because it's much more than you at first imagine. Okay,
Richard, would you like to add anything to that?
I can't really add a lot more, but I mean, I think probably if you think about what I think the CSPs sell their kind of value on, it's clear that it's kind of beneficial to the businesses that we're in. It's about the business continuity, the BCP aspect, the cost efficiencies, the scalability, and I think the word that always springs to mind is agility. And Ben's just highlighted that straight away. I mean, to get that kind of turnaround so quickly is clearly a business benefit.
Okay, let's see what our audience says. Please maybe see the results. Well, yep, certainly some operational benefits as discussed. Ben, what would you say to that? As you might expect, or?
Yeah, no, I think if you look at the adoption sort of curve of where we are, the business case for moving to cloud has been operational efficiency, cost reduction. Once you're there, though, you start to see, from a business point of view, the other benefits that were not those that were sold to you. I don't think I would have been I'd have been backing a cloud strategy on the basis that I could immediately connect to a regulator. However, the fact that I can immediately connect to regulators is really, really helpful, right? So and you get those business benefits once you're there, and they're quite hard to articulate ahead of time, mostly because people haven't seen them. But now we're seeing them, and I'm not going to say everybody's there, but it's that. It's almost like the network and hub effect that you had with the financial interconnect sort of data centers that we talked about. We're starting to see the same level of benefit within a number of the cloud providers.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to our audience for voting on that last poll. And I come to our final question for today. And let's have some quick fire advice for all the people out there who are implementing or planning to implement cloud in a colo or proximity setting. And I hate to come back to you, Ben, but your first thoughts.
No problem. So I think you asked us for three things. So
yeah,
I think the first thing would be consider and research what you can get directly from your cloud provider, or rather in your cloud provider, and that would be from other vendors. So what can you do which you couldn't, or what can you retire which you'd have to do yourself. Secondly, you really need to consider how much bandwidth you're going to need to get into the cloud. It's if you need a 10 gigabit connection, buy a cross connect. Don't go and buy leased lines. Get as close to that cloud provider as you can. And I guess finally, you really need to consider how many connections to the cloud you're going to need. It's obvious when you say it, but are you going to need? You're going to need at least 2. I would think you're going to need 3. And if you're global, then you're probably going to need at least 1 in each region. So it doesn't come for free to get that level of redundancy, but it's something that you want to have on your plan day one.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I kind of put down sort of understanding the requirements, the motivation for why you want to do this. We're seeing customers obviously standing up completely new kind of cloud op teams to execute on sort of migration programs. That's kind of something new. So to have an understanding of the requirements and motivations, is it purely TCO? Is it to build new services? Is it both? I think you kind of got to home into that. That then kind of break down to perhaps dependencies. And for the point I made earlier on, perhaps you start small, single application, single use case, because there's lots of dependencies. It's going to take time. The cost actually will probably increase, and you won't kind of realize the holy grail of actually saving money. And the point I've obviously heard from other customers is the culture. The culture has to be kind of right as well. The people, technology, and processes. If you can align sort of IT objectives with the business objectives, then you're kind of going to be onto a winner.
Excellent. A quick word from you, Saurabh.
Sure. So firstly, start with a low risk workflow. And the key thing is to start. Secondly, understand what organizational processes you'll need to change to make this transition happen. And thirdly and finally, choose your vendors carefully, absolutely, but also try to limit the vendor lock-in by staying cloud neutral so that you can seamlessly trade CME securities on Google and NASDAQ securities on AWS.
Okay, Arthur, just quickly, please.
I think I was looking at it as approach with an open mind, understand that it's an evolving space, and you need to be able to adapt and pivot based on the market changes. I think you need to come with a collaborative approach as well, which almost goes hand in hand with that. What can you learn from internally and externally and inside and outside of your organization, and choosing the right partner or partners is critical, both in the cloud, connectivity, technology providers stack.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience. Thank you too to Refinitiv and LSEG Business for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a great conversation with plenty of good content. Before we close, just a few A-Team group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down your screen to additional options, you can find out about A-Team Connect, our professional platform that you can use for webinars and events. Download the latest edition of our regulatory data handbook, or sign up for our May webinar on how to leverage APIs to build faster, scalable applications. That said, that's it for today. So thanks again to Richard, Saurabh, Arthur, and Ben. And thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. Meanwhile, thanks again and goodbye.